You're listening to the Genomics Minute, brought to you by Genome British Columbia.
Hi, this is Sally Greenwood, Vice President, Communications and Societal Engagement at Genome BC. Each year, the Don Ricks Distinguished Keynote Address honors one of Genome BC's co-founders by connecting life sciences research to the public through dialogue. This year's event featured Pamela Ronald, a plant pathologist, geneticist, and distinguished professor at the University of California, Davis. Pamela's laboratory has genetically engineered rice, one of the world's staple crops, for resistance to diseases and tolerance to flooding, which are serious problems for crops in Asia and Africa. An advocate for plant genetics, food security, and sustainable agriculture, she has written several opinion pieces and speaks all over the world. After her talk, Pamela shared a few more thoughts with Genome BC's Catalina Lopez-Correa on this important topic.
Well, what a pleasure to have you here, Pam. We had a great discussion yesterday about the role genomics is playing in agriculture. Today, the objective is to, through the podcast, go a little bit more in detail. Everybody's asking about the role genomics is playing in agriculture. So one of these first questions that comes from all different places is, of course, about GMOs. Just from a very high level, tell us the basic truth of GMOs. What's all about this, and just your perspective on GMOs.
Well, GMO stands for genetically modified organisms, and it doesn't have any specific scientific meaning. So in the United States, the FDA doesn't use that term, for example, because the term GMO has come to mean different things to different people. And so everything we eat has been genetically altered in some manner, and there's different methods of genetic improvement. And so one method is taking a gene from one species and putting it into another, which is often what people imagine when they're talking about GMOs. But there are other methods of genetic alteration that are very common as well, such as hybridization or mutagenesis. So there's many different types of genetic alteration, including modern methods such as marker-assisted breeding, genetic engineering, and genome editing.
As a geneticist, what is your primary goal in studying plants and agriculture?
So as a geneticist, I'm not really concerned about the genes in our food. I am very interested in thinking about ways we can advance sustainable agriculture and enhance food security. So I think it's important to sort of move away from the discussion on genes, which becomes a little bit of a distraction because genes are something that we eat every day, and think more about how we can reduce harmful inputs in the environment, or how we can enhance nutrition for the very poor, and thinking about what we can do to foster soil fertility and help farmers in rural communities. So to me, those are really the more important questions. The genetic methods that scientists are using today are very useful and practical and safe. And so I think what's perhaps more interesting is to think about those end products.
So food security is a pressing issue in developing countries, as we all know. And we experience now lots of resistance using genomics to tackle this issue in North America and in Europe. Are you observing this resistance to these technologies also in developing countries?
So I was fortunate to be involved in an international project to develop flood-tolerant rice. And this was developed using genomic technologies. So my colleagues at the International Rice Research Institute use a genomic technology called marker-assisted breeding to develop a rice variety that tolerates floods. So most rice varieties will die if they're completely submerged for 3 days, but this new variety can withstand 2 weeks of complete flooding and then produce grain. And this is very important in regions of the world where many farmers grow only enough rice to feed themselves and their families. So last year, about 6 million farmers grew this submergence-tolerant rice, and it yields, twofold or threefold, or sometimes even allows farmers to grow rice when they wouldn't be able to grow it at all. So I think I did have a great chance to visit the farmers with the team and talk to them, and they were very excited about using it. You know, they would see their neighbors growing it and see the benefits, and then would adopt the technology. So this technology is available through the national breeding programs. The seed doesn't cost any more than any other seed. Rice is self-pollinating, so growers can save their seed. So that was a situation where the technology has been very widely adopted, and I didn't see resistance. Another example is another type of genetic technology, which is taking a gene from a bacteria and putting it into a plant. And so that example is an eggplant in India. And in this case, it was a team of Bangladeshi and Cornell scientists. They used a genetic strategy that builds on an approach of organic farmers. So organic farmers spray a pesticide called BT, it's a microbial pesticide, on their crops, and it's very specific at controlling particular pests, and it's not harmful to humans or wildlife or fish. And the problem with eggplant in India, though, is that it's a very serious pest that can destroy the crop if it's not controlled. And spraying the pesticide is not very effective. So it's very expensive, it's hard to access, and it doesn't prevent the insect from actually getting inside the fruit. So the scientists express the gene encoding this organic protein inside the plant. And farmers have been, in the last 4 years, farmers have been growing these eggplant varieties, and they've been able to dramatically reduce their insecticide use almost down to zero. So in that case, it's a little bit more interesting in terms of talking about resistance, because the farmers that are growing it have had great success, and of course they're very pleased they don't have to spray chemicals anymore. But there are a number of people from the cities in Europe that have come into the fields of those farmers and asked them to quit growing it because they don't like that particular genetic technology. And they believe they could, do something else, like grow another crop or, use the chemicals, anything but genetic technology. So in that case, there has been quite a bit of documented resistance, not from the farmers. The farmers, of course, want to use it, but from people, I think, they're not so familiar with farming. And I think that's a problem for farmers.
I guess what you're telling us is that the farmers are ready. They're using these technologies, they see the potential and the power of genomics in the agri-food sector. But then we have the general public. There's a lack of understanding of the technology, but there's also a lack of understanding of what does it take to be a farmer, or what are the challenges the farmer are facing. And there's, I guess, another challenge that you mentioned yesterday around the regulatory bodies, the organizations and groups that will regulate, approve or not approve those new technologies. And what we're seeing also is that there is a lack of understanding and a lack of education in genomics from those, in particular in developing countries, and we even see it in Europe and in Canada, that some of these groups that will approve or not or regulate don't have often the necessary expertise in genomics to have a fully informed decision.
Well, I think so. One thing it's important for people to understand that there is a global scientific consensus. So it doesn't matter if you're on scientific bodies in India or England or the European Food Safety Authority or the National Academy of Science, World Health Organization. The scientists globally have concluded, very modestly, that the crops currently on the market are safe to eat. So no one makes a global statement about all the crops in the future. Everything has to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. So that's very clear and accepted in the scientific community. But then you see different regulations in different parts of the world. So in the United States, for example, there was a decision not to regulate genome-edited crops, which is a new genetic technology that scientists are very excited about. However, it will be regulated in Europe. So there is a lot of differences. All I can say is that they're very different decisions, and they're not based on scientific evidence. They're not based on what's going to be helpful to farmers or the environment.
What do you think so far GMOs have done to help us with food security? What concretely, you talk about helping us with the rice and more in the production side, but what about the food security with the GMOs?
They're all related. So if you can produce more rice by adding a single gene, and this is a marker-assisted breeding technology, that's absolutely food security, because if you can grow 2 or 3-fold more grain, that's more grain to feed your families, and often maybe you have enough grain to sell some of that, and then you have some income, and you can use that income to buy some maybe other kinds of fruits and vegetables or send your children to school. So that food security is very closely tied to economic security and other important aspects of living that we take, I think, quite for granted here on the West Coast. So there are, these benefits to yield, and in that particular instance, and then there's also benefits to reductions in chemical sprays, and the big example there is the BT approach, which is based on an organic approach, and the BT has been engineered into many different crops, not only eggplant, but also cotton, which is widely grown in China and India, and farmers there have massively reduced their chemical insecticide sprays, and that's been very, very important for farmers and their families, reducing poisonings and those types of things. There's also efforts to enhance nutrition, as we talked about last night. There's a very important project funded by the Rockefeller Foundation to enhance the provitamin A content of rice. And this is a project called Golden Rice. And this is important for communities where children are suffering from malnutrition because of lack of vitamin A. It's estimated that 500,000 children go blind every year because of lack of vitamin A, and half of these children will die every year. And so there's a lot of hope that this rice, once it's released, will be a complementary tool to other approaches that World Health Organizations and other agencies have been taking to try to fortify the diets of children in these countries, including helping them plant other types of gardens with vitamin A-rich foods and chemical supplements. And so the advantage of the Golden Rice approach is that it provides local food security. So the farmer, if they're in a remote rural community, just one grain of golden rice is something they can plant, they can grow it, they can eat it, they can gather the seed, and they can replant it. So they're not relying on government programs to provide vitamin supplements or other types of activities.
Just to close and to finish the podcast today, if we think about 20 years from now, let's go into the future, what do you think will be the next frontier in the use of genomics, and how will society and farmers, if you were thinking, extrapolating what we have today, what's your vision for what will happen in 20 years with genomics, with society, and with farmers?
Well, hopefully farmers will continue their wonderful work feeding us. And, I hope consumers learn a little bit more about farmers and what they do, and make the distinction between the West Coast here, the United States and Canada, versus much of the world where there's quite a bit of food insecurity. And I really do hope that our views in the developed world, whether they're possibly negative views, that we want to be sure that we're not preventing access of farmers in less developed countries from obtaining those tools, because we have plenty to eat. So, maybe it doesn't matter what we eat here in downtown Vancouver, but if consumers here are advocating not to use modern technologies to enhance the sustainability of our farms, the people that are going to suffer the most are the poorest people on the globe. So I do hope that we can move forward and be cognizant that we have one planet, we need to reduce waste, and we need to continue to farm efficiently. And I believe that we can do that. And with modern genetic tools, it's very exciting. So some of my colleagues have already used modern tools of genome editing to target, 13 genes at a time, edit them, combine them in new combinations, and come up with new traits that we haven't really seen before. And some of those traits will be very useful in a world where the climate is changing, pests and pathogens are changing. So I think we need to be ready.